All good? All right, thanks everyone for coming. Thank you. So welcome to Melb.js. This is the first Melb.js since February 2020. I'm not sure how many of you were with us back then in March when COVID hit and we suddenly lost our venue, and that was the end of Melb.js sort of indefinitely with no idea of when we might return. So I'm very excited that we are finally back here in person, and able to enjoy each other's presence, able to enjoy some talks, some pizza, some drinks, and get to catch up with the local scene and get out of our stuffy little home offices. Well, that's what I enjoy anyway. So thank you for coming. For those who don't know, my name is Mark Dalglish, and as I said, this is Melb.js. And we have a fantastic lineup tonight, I have to say. First off, we have Kitson Kelly, who's going to be talking to us about JavaScript on the Edge, the final frontier, with Dino. Paul Copplestone from Supabase is here to talk about building a full-stack app with Supabase in 30 minutes. And Anthony Mataz is going to be talking about Remix and doing more with less. Now, we have these speakers tonight because they kindly reached out and offered to speak. If that's something that you are interested in doing, we would love to have you here. If you've never spoken before, this is a great place to start. I know I can tell you this is the first, Melb.js is the first place that I spoke, and I'm sure it's true of a lot of others as well. So please, if you're interested, reach out. You can come talk to me during or after the event. Our DMs on Twitter are also open as well. So that's usually how we get talks through. So just shoot us a message there, and we would love to hear from you. This event would not be possible without the help of our illustrious sponsors. In fact, getting a venue in the current climate was quite tricky. So first of all, big thank you to Kogan for offering this wonderful venue and also the drinks and the pizza. So thank you to Kogan. So yeah, if you're interested in what Kogan's up to, they have a dev blog. If you're interested in any opportunities there, they're all available on their website. And if you want to buy a TV or whatever, they do that as well. We also have a bar tab afterwards to help entice you to stick around and talk some more, and not just sit and watch talks, but enjoy each other's company. So that is possible thanks to the support of Seek. So big thank you to Seek for that. So without further ado, we can just get straight into it. As I said, up first we have Kitson Kelly, who's going to be talking to us about JavaScript on the Edge, the final frontier. So please welcome Kitson.
Okay. It's been 2 years, I think, for most anybody doing it in front of people, humans. So I apologize if I'm a bit rusty in talking. Let's see. So I'm going to talk about JavaScript Dino on the Edge tonight. At Kitson K is my Twitter handle. And first, a little bit about me. I've been in the JavaScript space since about 2008. I used to be the former project lead for a sort of loved but not loved enough front-end framework called Dojo. Had a lot of influence in the industry. And my first contribution to Dino was in May of 2018, which was about 14 days after the initial commit. So I've been dealing with Dino for as long as it's been around. I created Oak, which is the most popular Dino-specific project. It's a middleware framework like Koa or Express for Dino. And in September 2020, I joined DinoLand full-time. Since I joined Dino, I've worked on the TypeScript integration initially. That was a lot of my work before I joined as well. The built-in language server in the command line and the developer experience as a whole have been kind of my areas of focus since I've joined. Talking about the industry as a whole, any of you that are as old as I am, which is getting older and older every year, might remember something in the late 90s, early 2000s called grid compute that was like the next big thing. And then this thing called cloud took over, and then we got into the era of serverless. I think in the last year, 2 years, the term edge compute has started to come in. Edge is, you can think of it as a sort of extension of serverless, but even more serverless. There's still servers involved, there's still other people's servers, but it's that concept that in content delivery in our websites, we learned a long time ago that having a CDN with points of presence that were very near our users was really important to deliver content fast and reliably to the users. And what we've seen in the industry is that we need to push that compute closer to the users. And there's a couple really important things that happen when you push that compute to the user. One, you can start to remove compute from their end user device, but you can also do a lot of really interesting things that were probably not possible that long ago. Even with a serverless thing where you had a centralized server, you might be in 1 or 2 regions in a big cloud provider, and there would still be latency, and you still had to worry about scalability and some performance issues. And so edge compute starts to break that down. But and again, why would you really need edge compute, particularly when we're talking about front-end technologies like JavaScript and TypeScript? So a lot of people immediately talk about, when they talk about edge compute, is server-side rendering is one of the big use cases, and that you can server-side render, so then you don't have to do it on the client side. And that's an important use case, but you also get consistent performance. It doesn't matter as much what the end user's device is capable of. You get a consistency of APIs when you're writing code, because you're only targeting a single runtime environment. You don't have to worry about whether somebody's pulling up IE11 or not necessarily. Especially since we're working in a world where sometimes people have full desktop browsers, and sometimes people have mobile browsers that are very constrained in low bandwidth situations. That not only is it the performance of the endpoint, but it's all the stuff that we have to ship down. But I think one of the things that gets often missed in that conversation is because you can take the compute off of the device, that means you immediately decrease the amount of surface area that you expose to your end users. So from a security perspective, right, you don't have to make API calls to your backend services or even your GraphQL middleware from your browser, right? Because that means that you have to secure all of that communication. You have to be really wise. You leak a whole bunch of information. You send a whole bunch of information to the browser, or even the application in the device that's unsecured, that people can investigate, exploit, and try to reverse engineer your technology, exploit your platforms, and do interesting things. And I think all of us in different cases have situations where we have to sort of defend against that. If you take the compute off the device, well, and all you're sending is HTML and CSS to the device, well, you've eliminated that problem, right? The only thing that gets off your network is the stuff that you actually want to render to the customer, the user. I think, especially in our ecosystem, we say JavaScript these days. You can't really say JavaScript anymore without mentioning TypeScript. It's become such a predominant thing in the industry. There's good reasons for that. There's probably some bad reasons for that as well too. And I think increasingly, every one of us that's doing front-end development, or even in middle tier development, WebAssembly is something that we have to increasingly give consideration for. I know from personal experience that having hybrid situations where you take some high performance or some really complex compute code that in another language like Rust and you compile it to WebAssembly, really enables some really powerful things, but that you expose an API that's really usable in the JavaScript space. So I think these hybrid situations we're all having to consider these days. And again, if you've got to ship WebAssembly to your browser in the front end, you're tied to the capabilities and the performance characteristics of that browser. And Edge Compute allows you to move that back one step onto your own environment. Specifically, for those of you not familiar with Dino, the Dino CLI was started in 2018. It was Ryan Dahl who created Node.js, started Dino initially as an attempt to sort of fix the things that he thought he had gotten wrong with Node.js. Like I said, I've been part of that journey from an early perspective, and have sort of been involved quite heavily since then. And we've been trying to build with Dino something that that works really well. Of course, money is money, and you have to make money off of open source software, which is an interesting thing. And the particular path that we chose in Dino is that what we would do is take the foundation of that CLI, the sort of Node.js equivalent, and create something that we call Dino Deploy, which is a commercial service of this sort of edge compute variety. And that's how we intend to make money as a commercial enterprise, is continue to open source and develop completely the CLI. It'll be open source forever. It is an open source project. It has a robust set of contributors that are outside of the core team, and then focus on the commercial viability to pay our bills and to pay people to do that. And I'm thankful for that. I've been in open source for a long time. I've had the luxury when I was being paid to work on open source before, when I was on the Dojo project. We did consulting online. That's a way to make money, but you've really, it takes people dedicated full time to create great open source software. And so, the other option, of course, is to sell our souls to some big corporation, which, who knows, that may happen in the future. And then hope that they continue to want to invest in it. And so we chose our path, and our path was to create a commercial product. We didn't really like the freemium, like Dino CLI premium, that you have to pay every month to use. Didn't seem like the right thing. So we thought a completely separate commercial product. And so we created Dino Deploy. It's edge compute, developed locally, deployed globally. So when you deploy your code, it's available instantaneously across 33 regions. Zero config, zero maintenance. It runs TypeScript, JavaScript, WebAssembly, provides modern APIs, and quite a bit of the web platform. And one of the things that we've realized too is that that the web platform has done a really good job of sort of getting its act together, right? The big vendors in that space have worked. It's taken a long time, but they kind of work in conjunction. But the TC39, the JavaScript standards body, and the web browser consortiums, the WhatWG and that, are really, again, focused on that browser thing. And Cloudflare and Dino, we felt that there really needed to be a group focused on this sort of space of the sort of edge compute, edge runtime space. And so a month or so ago, we announced the formation of WinterCG. Cloudflare, Vercel, Igalia, Dino, and Shopify are sort of the sponsors of that at the moment. And really, what we want to do is much like the browser arena have tried to push forward with standardization of things. We want to take on those things in WinterCG that are for sort of server runtime, JavaScript, TypeScript server runtime things, to make sure that when standards come through, that they do that, so we don't end up with a fractured situation where everybody's locked into Cloudflare or even Dino deploy, right? We want there to be we want innovation in not through lock-in, right? We want innovation in the space through other mechanisms. As I said with Dino Deploy, there's a rich set of APIs. From a web platform perspective, there's a whole bunch of web platform APIs that where we feel that there's applicability in a server environment. We go ahead and bake those in if there's a good established web standard for it. And we also try to use a web standard. If we want to do something, we try to adopt an existing web standard. So you've got streams, you've got web crypto, web sockets, you've got fetch, request response, URL pattern, which is an emergent standard in the web standard bit, which we helped contribute to and push forward, which is sort of the path to regex baked into your browser, right? So Chrome has it. I think Chrome has it shipped now, and the other browsers are going to start shipping it. We've got it in Dino, so you've got built-in routing. Matching now, and import maps, and then for those things that just don't make sense for a browser standard to exist, we've had to create a number of APIs within the Dino namespace. We try to be really conservative with these and not have a huge amount of cruft in there, but there are just some things that there isn't a good web standard for. And so we've got other things in there that allow some file access. We tried to use the web file stuff. It's a mess. It's a complete another mess. So we're still having to do some things on our own there. And even on deploy, we treat the repo that you deploy as a local file system. So you can actually write code that reads out of whatever repo you deployed, which is pretty cool. I've kind of had two roles recently over the past year. Obviously working on some of the core CLI stuff to deal with the language server, but the other part of my time has actually been dogfooding a lot of what we've done on deploy and trying to create web properties that meet a particular need that we need for Dino, but also are an experimentation in that. And one of those is doc.dinoland, and this is it was a very complex bit of project. It's got WebAssembly in there. It's got a little bit of everything, but essentially what it does is you throw any sort of publicly readable JavaScript URL at it, a module at it, and it'll read the JS doc for you, render it, including the markdown comments and all of that sort of stuff, and do that that on the fly for you. We obviously use it for documenting the Dinoland packages and libraries, but you can pretty much throw any URL at it, and it'll try its best to figure out what it is. And as you can see, you know, this is off that real page there. You know, that's all server-side rendered. The only bit of JavaScript on that page is that copy button, because you can't paste to the clipboard unless you use Navigator. So there's a little bit of JavaScript that copies the import statement in there, and the rest of it is, there's zero client-side JavaScript, but it's all written in TypeScript on the server side. Okay. Oh, dog fooding. Okay. I'm going to try this. We'll see how this goes. My ego may have gotten the best of me, though, on live coding. All right. I'm sorry? I will try one more. Let's see. I have no room now, but we'll try that. I still have 80 columns. Okay. Let me. I think one of the things that the industry has probably gotten wrong, and especially, not that I want to completely rubbish AWS Lambdas, but like local development has always been the afterthought of a lot of these tools, right? And because we started with the CLI first, local development was like the only thing that we had, and we wanted to make sure that local development transitioned well into that remote development. And we're not completely there yet, but because they're in a lot of ways the same code, it's allowed us to, the Dino CLI is a great development tool for deploy. So I've got a little framework that I've been experimenting with, because like I said, Oak, you know, sort of the big Express-like framework for Dino. I've been experimenting with like how can I reduce that down to sort of a minimal get started. All I want to do is take some JSX and send it to somebody, right? And I want a low overhead thing. So I've been working on this project. So Dino CLI. This, by the way, is kitsenk / Dino -on -the edge dash. And I'll share it afterwards. But it's got a code space up there, so this is actually. I think I saw a tweet the other day, local dev is dead, right? And that could be the case, right? So this is running on a dev container on GitHub, and if you clone that repo and you open up the code space for it, it'll have the latest version of Dino installed for you. Dino run HTTPS, Dino and X, not. All right. The one thing that we had with the Dino CLI, I mean, and we keep debating this internally, is like having a package manager can just like get in the way of things, like installing all of your dependencies locally. Like you have a tool that installs all of this, right? So you got to install all of your dependencies before you run your code. So Dino can run URLs, right? And so I'm going to run it here. It's asking me, this is a little setup thing. Dino CLI doesn't have any permissions by default. You have to give it permissions. So it's saying, well, I want to be able to read the current directory, and I want to be able to write to the current directory. My little script here is saying, okay, I want to set up these things for you. Will you do that? And it's now written out the little scaffold of this librarian project. I have to cheat a little bit. This is a bug that I need to fix in the sense that it doesn't always, the extension doesn't update to the fact that some of the files have been written out, so I have to reload it so it actually reads those files, but I'll fix that. as I mentioned before, one of the lesser known web platform standards that Dino adopted fairly early on is import maps. And again, this is partly why we don't think you need a package manager, right? Because an import map essentially is kind of like your package JSON. It allows you to name and rename packages to make them easier to import into your code. And so on these imports here, the left-hand side is the whatever I want to call it in my code, and the right-hand side is what I'm actually doing. And you can see in here, it's scaffolded out all of the sort of packages that I need to use and have available in there, and where the code is actually there. And again, if I need to update a version, I don't have to update my package JSON and then do npm I or yarn or whatever. I just go in here and change it, and it will update the code that way. So here's our main thing here. Really simple scaffold. I've got this router. Again, it uses the URL pattern behind the scenes to be able to do the pattern matching. And I've got some JSX in here, which is a real basic thing. One of the recent things to the one of the recent things that have been added to Dino is the sort of scripts concept that we call them tasks. And so also in my, I'll show it to you here, is I've got it scaffolded out this little task for me, which again, it has the permissions in there of which I'm allowing it to have. So it's allowing it to connect to the network, but it's also allowing a high resolution timer thing. So high resolution time is off by default in Dino to avoid sort of those sort of exploits there, somebody trying to profile your code and figure out, heartbleed and all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to run that task now, and it's gone through, it's checked the code, it's made sure it's type checked, and there we go. So that's great, that's local development, but that's not totally interesting. Now I want to share my wonderful web app with the world. My web app. Oops. All right. So I've got that up on GitHub here. Oh. Okay, and this is going to be small. Just well, I'll go one more in. Okay, and you can see we've got our little thing up here, and I'm going into the deploy dashboard now. I'll get this as big as I can, and I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to select. Oh, and there we go. Dino on the edge. I want main, and it's asking me what is the root of the project. And there we go. It's grabbed all my dependencies, and it's made the app available, and kitsenk-dino-on-the-edge.dino-dev is live for the world to see now. So you can go there if you want to, but that's not totally, the best thing. Let's do something more interesting. So. Like I said, fetch is baked in, HTTPS. This is another thing that I've been working on, is more robust set of APIs for Dino, and particularly CLI. I think one of the biggest challenges that we've had is people discovering like what you can do with Dino, right? You know, everybody knows what you can do with Node because there's been 10 years of people using Node, right? But there's a lot of good software out there for Dino. People aren't discovering it. And I think that's been one of the factors of people sort of getting on board with it. It's like, well, where do I start? And actually, if you look at our main third-party package page at the moment, you wouldn't know that there was a lot of Dino stuff, and it's a problem that we know about, and it's one that is my day job at the moment is trying to change that and expose a lot of that and is there. Again, the advantage of having all modern standards, everything is ES modules, top level await has been there forever, and so I'm going and fetching some JSON that I happen to know, and I'm going to const packages is await, where is JSON? Oh well. This is just hacking stuff at the moment. Okay. And I think it's. I will try one more time. Okay. I have no space to type now. I think this is right. Hold on. I'm going to cheat. Just, AC, API. Oh, good thing I checked that. All right. Oh, items. Okay. This is really hacky. Name, okay, name description, okay. Name, string, description, string. Okay. Okay, I don't even, let me see. No, there we go. Yeah, thank you. Okay, and let's see here, we'll do const items equals packages map. This is package, oh, no, packages.
So what's that URL pointing to? API land, Dino,
Yeah, so this is a work in progress, like I said. So I've been, like, this is literally work that did earlier today, not all of API.dinoland, but it's active. We're not live with it yet. Well, it's live, it's accessible on the web, but it's a API endpoint running on deploy, backed up with a Google data store, where it's fetching the information about packages that are registered with our package registry, and then providing it back. So I just happen to know that it's there. We could grab something else, but let's see here. Name, description. Okay. And name, description. Okay, this is really hacky, and I won't torture you too much longer on this. Hopefully not. And let's see here. We'll return a div now. This little framework, you can see here, I'm server-side rendering everything. So this includes T-Wind, which is a great library if you're doing a lot of server-side rendering, and you like to use Tailwind functional CSS, which I am totally sold on these days. So that, oh no, there we go. And let's try see how hacky that is. Okay. And again, we can go ahead and that local development is really important. Hopefully I haven't screwed this up. Okay. Ah, okay, I haven't screwed it up. Okay. But that's not totally interesting. Here, so let's see, class. And I'm not doing watch on this, I could, but I think it's list. I don't remember my Tailwind. Anybody know offhand? Oh, well, okay. We'll can worry about that later. Okay, so, and I've got local logging here, and you can see that took 6 milliseconds to render. Git commit am stuff. Push. Okay, and now it's on deploy. There we go. Okay, that's enough live coding for me. Any questions? And I'll be able to talk afterwards as well too. Yeah.
Import that thing, and you're essentially pointing to like the URL. So if I wanted to use Dino, I wanted to use an existing JavaScript framework like Express, could I? Or I'd have to wait for them to do the Dino style.
So, yeah. The top level thing is that there is a lot of the Node.js ecosystem that you can just use in Dino using either esm.sh or skypack.dev, which both package stuff as ES modules, right? And particularly esm.sh is there. We know that journey isn't totally complete, so things like Express that do really deep bindings into Node ecosystem are a bit harder to like make transparent and work over that sort of thing. But like T-Wind, T-Wind isn't developed for Dino. T-Wind is, and if I go back here and we look at the packages that I'm using in here, is the ones for Dino Land X are specifically written for Dino, but things coming off of esm.sh like T-Wind are not. They're written. They're npm packages that are being brought in just as a ESM bundle. So the journey is a bit bumpy from like Node to Dino, and it's one of those things that we're actively working on. Writing, authoring in Dino and like sharing the rest of your code with the world is a little bit more established. There's a tool called DNT that we created several months ago that lets you take a Dino project and create an NPM package, including polyfilling all the stuff that you need from Dino to be able to have that work in the NPM ecosystem. But that two-way journey is from Node to, you can do it, but it's not super simple, right? On the other hand, a lot of people like why, if you're starting greenfield, like why would you want to drag Express in when there's better solutions out there that are there? And there are, for those things that you're comfortable with in the Node ecosystem, there's probably a better suited Dino package that's probably more modern, that doesn't have isn't supporting, polyfilling strange, weird things and having 50 million dependencies, right? But yeah, if it's modern JavaScript or TypeScript, it just runs, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, but Peter said that if the package review is just JavaScript and there's no node modules in it, then it would be fine.
If
Mo-
it's pure ESM and it's on npm and it doesn't import something from a node built-in package, then without any sort of transpiling magical CDN, it's just going to unpackage. You'll be able to import and use it in Dino. You just need to make sure that those any dependencies that it has is inside your import map. And you can have universal packages that start in npm land, but it's harder to go the other way.
So it's going to resolve the my packages.
It won't need to use the package JSON at all if the npm package is already pure ESM.
Sorry, how does just quite a nice way in general?
Well, I don't like Jest. People made a lot of noise about this is when Node.js included a minimal framework. We had done that like a year ago in Dino. I've taken up too much time, but it's also integrated into the IDE, and especially if you're using VS Code. So I'll just show you module test.ts. So Dino test is built in. There's a BDD library as well that you can import if you prefer that style test, and function. Console log. Okay. Hello. And if you're using VS Code, and the Dino language server, that already has the test API built in, and you can go ahead and execute your tests from in there. What's it doing? Supposed to, oh, there it goes. I don't know what it did. Okay. And so you have the full IDE integration for your tests. And you can also then just do Dino test, and it will glob for any tests and give you the results. So I would say, hopefully you wouldn't need Jest. But there are polyfills for Jest if you really feel like you just throws globals everywhere and makes your life miserable. Okay.
What's the story on observability? Like, how would you look at log output or like other metrics?
Yeah. So the APM type observability that you get with like Node runtimes for the CLI isn't as mature as that. So like async hooks, and there's quite a bit of instrumentation in there. It's one of those things that we want to eventually get to in the Dino CLI. Yeah, but like on deploy, like how the observability on deploy, it's growing. It's probably not as good as we'd like it. So there's some analytics about your performance in deploy. You can get logs, which we'll load here in a second. So so console log, just as you would there. In particular, it's using people are using my website. I'm famous. So whatever you can just console log, and the console log behaves just like it would on the CLI. Includes the Chromium, the %C and CSS arguments in the console log, which is how these are colored. So yeah, it's pretty there from a logging perspective, and there's additional information, but like the focus for deploy, particularly that zero config, like you can add some environment variables, but like that's all you need, right? What Git repo am I using? every push, and you do another branch, it'll do a branch deployment for you, give that available in there. So you'll be able to see your live one, but you can also see your Git history, but your branches also deploy there as well. Okay, I should probably yield the floor, and I'll be available afterwards. Thank you.
All right, we're going to have a very short break, so stretch your legs, get a drink. I don't know if there's any pizza left, but there is. Help yourself, and we'll be back in 5-10 minutes. Thank you. Everyone, if you want to take your seats, we're about to kick it off again. So there was a little bit of pizza left, so hopefully you managed to get a slice. So we're one talk down, everyone, and we have 2 more talks for you before we can head out for the drinks afterwards, which again I will remind you are sponsored, so do not leave. So as you can see up on the screen here, we have our next talk. We're very blessed to be joined by Paul Copplestone tonight from Supabase, CEO of Supabase. There we go. So he's a big deal. And he's here to talk to us about building a full stack app with Supabase in 30 minutes. So please welcome Paul.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear? It's working? Cool. Okay, so thanks for the intro. And also I asked to go after Dino, so that'll become apparent soon after we describe a bit about Supabase. So before I begin, has anyone heard of Supabase? Does anyone know what we do? Oh, actually quite a few. All right, cool. And I assume that most people know what Postgres is? Yeah, okay, sweet. That makes things a lot easier. I know this is a JavaScript conference, so I'll focus it mostly on the JavaScript, but how we make it quite easy. So first of all, what are we? We position ourselves as an open source Firebase alternative. What that really means is we do things a little bit differently from Firebase, but the aim is to be as easy to use as Firebase, but using very scalable tools. All the tools we choose are open source, so we try to either choose an existing open source tool or we build one ourselves and we make sure it's very scalable. So the main core piece of our tech is Postgres. And really what we're trying to do is make sure that front-end developers or any developer really can use Postgres as easily as possible. So yeah, I guess what I'm going to do this time is coined as like build a full stack app in 30 minutes. Actually, Alistair built the app over the past weekend, I think, and I'm just going to plug in a few pieces so it looks like I'm doing a lot of the work, but really it's thanks to the good stuff that Alistair's done. So here's the app that we're going to build sort of live. It's a movie sort of theater booking system. So we've got a couple of movies, and you can think about how you might build this yourself. It's got to work amongst multiple people, so you need a back-end store. Here it's built with Next.js and some Tailwind, I think. And we've got 2 movies, Batman and Everything Everywhere all at once. And the idea is you click in, and then it's got a couple of seats. And when you book a seat, it's only going to allow you to book 3 seats, and someone else should not be able to book that same seat. So it's kind of a common problem. We've got 2 theaters as well, so different size theaters. And we'll be able to do this live, and you'll see as well, it works in real time. That's one of the features that I'll go through, so that when someone books a seat, you'll see it disappear on the page as well. So that's what we're going to build. It's really all built, so I'm just going to plug in a few things. But first of all, before I do, I'll go through a few things. Now, I know what everyone's going to say, so I'm going to zoom in. Okay, is that big enough? Yeah, good, that's as big as I can go. Okay, so supabase.com, you can check it out. What we do, I've already done that. I'm actually from New Zealand, so but I haven't lived there for a long time. I now sort of position myself mostly in Singapore and Europe. Our company itself is open source. We have people, I think, in around 16 or 17 different countries. We started in January 2020, so we started basically when COVID was kicking off. We did the first ever YC remote batch, so our YC Summer 20 is when it went fully remote, so we actually did YC from Singapore, my co-founder and I, and from there we've just grown the team fully remote. So actually, the first time I met a lot of our team, Alistair included, was this year after working with a lot of people for over like a year and a half. We all flew to Berlin to meet each other. So yeah, it's been a crazy couple of years. Okay, so I'm going to demo, first of all, some of the things that you get from Supabase and what it looks like. When I say open source, most people think, well, you have to self-host, but we actually started very similar to Dino Deploy. There is a sort of platform that you can use, maybe because a few people have seen it, they know, so I'll just go through this very quickly. There's a platform where you can sign up, you click a button, you get a Postgres database and a few other things, and this is it. So here I am inside my dashboard, and I can click into one of my projects. Every one of these projects is a full Postgres database, and you can see there's a landing page. It gives you a bunch of usage statistics that update in real time. The main one is the database. If you've ever used Postgres, you might know that it's relational. It's a bit annoying to set up tables. So we've kind of got this Airtable-like editor where you can see, for example, the two movies that I showed you before. If I zoom in here, you'll see actually they're in table format here, and I can edit these directly inside the dashboard. The other thing is that I can set up tables. So here I'm just going to call one Melb.js, and I'm going to add a column called Hello World, and that one can be a text column. And if I save that, then it'll go away and create the table directly inside the database. So if you don't know how to use SQL, you can get started very easily. You don't need to know SQL. Okay, that's the new table. I can insert rows here, and then we're away laughing. Okay, the other things that we've got besides the database that we'll cover in this one, we've got auth, authentication, logging in people with either magic links. They can be logged in with email, phone auth, and you can see Apple, Azure, Bitbucket, Discord, Facebook, you name it, we're getting through a lot of these. A lot of these contributed by open source developers, actually. So we host the auth server that was originally created by Netlify, and then we added a few of these additions on, and we plug it very nicely in with the Postgres database. The other one that we've got is storage. So you can see here, we've got a nice sort of storage editor. You can drag and drop your files inside the dashboard itself, and then you can use it like an S3 bucket, if you know what S3 is. So any large files, images, anything big that you wouldn't store inside the database can get stored in here. We've got a SQL editor, which I won't go through in this one, but you can interact with your Postgres database with SQL. And then the other neat thing that I'm going to show is the APIs. So we just created that table called Melb_JS, and you can see now I've got documentation inside the dashboard itself, which will show me how to interact with that table. We've auto-generated an API. It's a REST API that we provide a couple of wrappers around. So you can see if I want to fetch all of the data, all rows from that table, I just need to copy and paste this snippet into my JavaScript application. It can be a React Native application or any JavaScript remix or something like that. You can interact through, as well, just curl requests, so everything's exposed as an API URL. Or, as well, we have done something neat, because I know there are some GraphQL people here. You can also use GraphQL. So we introspect the database. We've actually built a Postgres extension that introspects the schema of your database and converts it into a GraphQL schema. It's very similar to PostgreFile, if you know it, but we operate inside the database. So if you have ever heard of the N+1 problem with GraphQL, it's not a problem because the logic runs with the code itself, so with the data itself. So it's very fast, and we're actually about to rewrite it in Rust, as you do, to make things very fast. So yeah, it's quite a neat solution. So really, we're giving you pretty much every tool that you might need to build a front-end application is the idea. So you can just focus on the product itself, and you don't need to worry about all the other things. The last one that I'm going to call out is, of course, functions, which was actually our most demanded feature for a couple of years. We've got quite a vocal community, and we spent a couple of years trying to figure out whether we would do functions or not, because we're a database company primarily. And eventually we landed on a good solution. We checked out WASM, we checked out all sorts of, we checked out Cloudflare, and of course we're open source, so who did we pair with? Is Dino. So if you have written your Dino functions and you want to deploy them on Dino deploy, we just wrap Dino deploy, and you can host them with us, you can host them with Dino deploy, and it's pretty simple. You just do Supabase functions, deploy the name of your function, and it's, yeah, pretty much the same experience. Cool. Okay, so let's show how we can interact with the our demo. So we're gonna do, the demo is built with Next.js and Supabase, and it also has React Query to wrap a few things. It doesn't have to be React Query, you can use whatever you want, and Tailwind. So let's first of all let's see what we've got, make sure that it's running. Okay, so the very first thing is we've got this screen which should fetch, not that one, should fetch a couple of movies. And this one's very simple, so instead of really live coding, I'm just gonna copy and paste. So the first thing I've got is to get these two movies from our database, and I only wanna get probably the information that I need, the ID, the name of the movie, the image URL. So I'll come into here, and I believe get movies, yep, here. So here you can see,
You probably heard this. Could you make it a bit bigger?
okay, which one, the code?
The code, yes.
Damn, okay, now I see, because when you're here, it's huge, all right. I'm going to go like this. Is that okay? It's better? Okay. Well, all right, I'll zoom in here as well. So, all right, get movies not implemented. So now all I need is some code to get our movies. So I'm gonna cheat or do exactly what every developer does, is just copy and paste. So here I now have lost myself because it's so big. Okay. I wonder if I format. Yeah, it doesn't. All right. So the main thing here is that I'm going to do, we've instantiated our application. We give this API, right? The API you can interact with in two ways. You can either be anonymous or logged in. When you're logged in, of course, you want to limit the amount of data that you supply to your user. We do something called Postgres row-level security. So you actually write the access rules directly into your database. It's very fast. But for now, you don't need to worry about that. All you need to know is that you want to fetch all the movies. And so what do we got? We've got an API and a JavaScript library. So I'm going to say supabase.from the movies tables, and it's going to return a type of movie. I'm going to select everything. Select star just means select everything. Probably I could select individual columns, ID, name, etc. But for now, we're just coding, so it's good. There's an abort signal if I move away, so we can cancel the import. And that's it. We're just going to await the data, and then it'll return, we return errors, and you can choose to throw on error as well. It's an option, but we just liked the pattern of returning the error. So here is the data, which should be an array of movies. So come down here, if there's an error, we're gonna throw it, and if there's no movies, then we'll just say no movies. But we're going to have two movies. If I save this, then I refresh, and you can see now I'm returning my movies. So really, the bulk of fetching out of Postgres was just this one line. And so that's kind of the goal of Supabase, to make fetching data extremely easy. Okay, so after we've fetched multiple movies from a table, we're probably going to want to fetch an individual movie based on its ID. And in this case, you want to select by ID on the database. And this one, probably you can guess that it's not too much more difficult. We just want to pass in get movie detail. Okay. Wow, it's very hard to read. get movie. There we are. Okay. So in this case, we've got a filter, which is an equality filter. And actually, these filters, they kind of translate into SQL code. So you can basically do any query that would run on a Postgres database. That includes not equals, contains, range filters, full text search even. So you can build search capabilities inside Postgres and use them over the API. So here, we're just going to get one movie by its ID, and we're going to select everything. And then this is the key part. For this movie, we're going to get all the seats. So if you've ever used a relational database, you know that you can build foreign keys. So we've got two tables in our database, a movies table and some seats which relate to the movies. You can see that here. I'll just pop it open into the database. So we've got movies here with the two movies, and then we've got a bunch of seats. It's a bit of a funky schema design, but it works. And they all relate to a particular movie. And when you set up the table, you say, oh, this belongs to a movie. Now, when you use the API, it'll automatically detect the relationship between multiple tables. So you don't have to do any sort of joining or anything like that. It'll do it automatically. And of course, if you've used GraphQL, it should look kind of similar if you squint your eyes a bit to fetch nested joins. So once again here, we're going to say that maybe it'll return a single, and then if the movie isn't found, it'll return movie not found. If we save that and we refresh that, well, you can see now it's actually returned the data for that movie, and you can see this movie actually has more seats related to it. Okay, now if I select these and I try to reserve the seats, it should throw reserve seats not implemented. And this is one where actually there's a funny bit of logic that goes on when you try to reserve seats. If you probably used maybe a NoSQL database, it might be hard to, not necessarily, but some other implementations, it might be very difficult to have sort of the atomic acidity that a database like Postgres has. So you might end up having two people booking the same seat twice. This actually, you can set up constraints on a Postgres database, so it's very good for things like financial data especially, but really for anything. If you don't like relational databases, by the way, it's worth saying that Postgres also has JSONB, so if you just want to use JSON inside your database, you can do that too. But in this case, we're going to make sure that when we book a seat, you can only have one person booking that seat. And in this case, I'm going to dig in. I've actually written, well, Alistair has written this one as a Postgres function. Here, it's a long function, so I'm not going to go through it, but you can really leverage, you could write it on the front-end side, or you could write it on the back-end side. And this function is going to make sure that after you're booked, it's going to detect, first of all, that you can only book 3 seats at a time, and also that when you book it, it has not already been booked. And it will throw an error, even if 2 people are booking at the same time, it's going to throw an error, even if the network requests are in flight at that point. So here, if we go down, we're going to go into the lib data seats. And all we're going to do is execute that Postgres function. And you can write any Postgres function you want. You can even write Postgres functions, funnily enough, in JavaScript. There's something called PLv8, which runs Node inside Postgres. And actually, if you really hunt through, you'll see we've actually done a small POC for running Dino inside Postgres. So we're trying to push the boundaries of Postgres quite a lot. And if I go in here, I think I'll find a not implemented somewhere. Up.
Down.
Okay. Where is it?
Further.
Further?
There.
Reserve seats, yeah. Wait, yeah, this one. Okay. Okay, cool. So here it should then allow me to reserve these seats. And how's it going to do that? Here we're going to do an RPC, remote procedural call. So we're going to do a function call on the database. And here you can see it's going to pass in the function name and any parameters that it that you need. So it's just like any other function, a Postgres function. You can write it in many different languages, but we've written ours in SQL. And then we're going to query, and it's going to return a single result. From there, it should work. Let's see. You must be logged in. Okay, so then finally, that's the last thing we're going to show, is how to do logins. We provide all these auth providers, and actually this is one of our most used products. People really love the auth component of Supabase, mainly because you actually we store when you set up auth with Supabase, we store all of the users inside an auth schema. So you can do a bunch of queries on them. You can join your users' data to your production data. So if you've ever used something like Auth0, it's a bit confusing because they all sit and you've got to fetch them from an API, and then you've got to match them somewhere. But with us, everything lives in one place, all in the database. So that's why I think people really enjoy using the auth. So here I'm going to do the sign in with an email, but you'll see we've also got GitHub. They're all the same. I'm going to go here, punch in auth, sign in, no, sign up. There it is. Okay, and in this one, the only thing to call out is that the sign up can be, you're going to pass in, no, sorry, here. I was going to say, so you're going to pass in into the sign up an email or password. If we wanted to do magic links, it's pretty simple. You just remove the password and you've got magic links. It'll send an auto confirm to the user. They click a link in their email, and then it returns them to the website. And then from here, you can see actually we're providing a bunch of data which is going to match the same data that the GitHub API would provide, so that it doesn't matter if they provide GitHub logins or sign-in logins, the shape of the data will match. Yeah. From there, I believe that we've got sign in with GitHub. I'll try this out, but it probably won't work because it's localhost. It did. Okay, and then from there, you can see that we've got these three, and I reserve seats. Okay, and that's saving everything into the database. I know because if I go to my production application, you can see these are booked. And in fact, if I refresh now, the URL is quicktix.vercel.app. I don't know if anyone can go to it on their mobile phone, maybe the Batman and the Batman movie, and book a couple of these seats. And this is kind of the last step of the APIs that we provide. They're all real time. So this is actually the genesis of Supabase. I was using Firebase in my previous company for a chat application, and then it wasn't scaling for some reason, and I had to migrate to Postgres, but Postgres doesn't have real-time functionality built into it. So what I did was write that functionality with an Elixir server, and that was sort of the first open source part of it. And from there, it gained some traction on Hacker News, and then we sort of started the company from there. Did it work? Did anyone book?
Give it a refresh.
It might need a bunch of people. All right, hold on. Give this one a go, and hopefully you should see it working. If not, then I've probably just broken something.
One more refresh, because I don't think. And then let's try. Of course not.
Okay, well, the demo gods are not so kind to us today, but just know that the functionality is there if you ever need to listen to real time. And in fact, there's a very cool thing worth checking out. We're about to bring out a lot of multiplayer functionality. So if you know about multiplayer, there are some things that are incredibly difficult. Presence, signaling. So for example, this is an application which should, I don't know actually, yeah, you can see now we've got someone typing, which is probably Alistair, and I can type here as well. So we're about to release a bunch of functionality for our real time where you can use this presence and real-time inside to build any collaborative app. So we'll hook into CRDTs and things like that if you know what they are. Cool. So I think that's pretty much the end of it. So real-time. Yeah, and the other one, we use storage. You saw the image thumbnails. You can try it out. I think as well, it's on github.com, Kiwi Couple, Supabase Quick Ticks. Kiwi Couple is my GitHub handle. And yeah, before we get into questions, of course, we're hiring. That's always the thing. We have raised a ton of money to sponsor people to work on open source all the time. So we've now raised over $100 million to make sure that we can sustain ourselves for the next 10 to 20 years, hopefully indefinitely. So if you're looking for a company and you like JavaScript or Elixir or basically any language, we use them all, then definitely ask. I don't think we have actually, we're quite strict on our hiring, so I don't think we've got any JavaScript roles online. So maybe just send me an email or find me on Twitter and ping me if you really want a job. And the email, actually, I'm not going to say it because we're live, but you can ask me. You can ask me later. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Any questions? Cool. Yep.
Probably one of the most impressive parts of this, as I was saying, is the turning Postgres into a real-time database. And you said you wrote that in Elixir. Why Elixir, and would you be looking at other options today?
Yeah, the question for those on the live stream was the real time. Why did we choose Elixir? So I don't know if many people know much about Elixir, but it's this kind of beautiful language where you can essentially scale out horizontally, and you can sort of do this hot reloading. You can do a ton of things. It's got its background in Erlang and in phone systems. This is important with WebSockets because often you need to add additional nodes and you need to refresh the code without dropping the sockets themselves. So it's very good for these use cases. That was my first reason for choosing Elixir because we had a bunch of people connected to from their phones to the servers, and I actually needed to do a lot of hot code reloading without dropping the connections. Then the other neat thing is that you can essentially, when you tie multiple Elixir servers together, they kind of function like individual units. The way they run processes is very good. So you can actually just chuck more servers at it. And so we can do something like, at the moment, it's a one Elixir server to one Postgres server, but we're about to run this multi-tenant to where we'll have servers all around the world. We'll run them on Fly. And they'll be able to manage everyone connecting to the same cluster. And that's important because, for example, if you're all connected to the same room, let's say on Twitch, you need the person who's in the US to have the same sort of room and server connection as the person in Europe or Australia so that they can pass messages around each other. And you can try split it by sort of sharding by room, or you can use something that's very elegant and solves the problem automatically, and Elixir does that. Yep.
How do you handle the sort of scalability requirements as people's databases grow, or the requirements of, say something as an int and then you need to upgrade to a big int or indices or vacuums?
Yep. So we're building, the question was, how do we handle the scaling requirements of Postgres? So first of all, Postgres scales very far. I know people say it's just an individual database, but to be honest, vertically scaling Postgres has not been a problem for anyone on Supabase right now. And actually, it's part of our target audience is currently, front end. So we want to make it very easy for front end developers. There will need to be, we're improving our observability. So actually, we end up debugging a lot of our users' applications. They'll do things that break Postgres. They haven't got an index on. People have done basically everything that I can imagine with Postgres, scraping whole websites, storing them in Postgres, polling them every second, downloading gigabytes every second. So yeah, we've basically seen it all at this stage. So what we're trying to do is just provide as many observability tools and hints as we can so that users can debug it themselves, which includes query optimizers and all these things, we'll abstract it away so that you can kind of just click a button and get all this for free. Then when it gets to horizontal sharding, or importantly, what is now becoming very popular, serverless databases. This is done very well by, for example, PlanetScale have sort of used a extension system for MySQL, and they, which has been open source for a while, and they've done a good job. We'll go with, and we're actually planning to sponsor a open source sort of company, which is building a lot of the cloud native features into Postgres itself. So we at the moment will just do horizontal scalability with replicas, read replicas. That will get us probably a few years before we start hitting the sort of terabyte type use cases. And by that stage, we hope that we would have upstreamed a lot of the key features that are required into Postgres itself. Yep.
With the whole edge compute being a thing, presumably you still need to create a Supabase database in a region, or is there a story for like multi-region stuff down the road?
Yep. So you create it in a region, your master. I don't know if anyone knows about cap theorem and things with databases, but it's a very hard problem to solve. So you can either choose eventual consistency or strong consistency. With Postgres, you choose where you're going to store your key, like where your writes are going to be, and then you can scale out your reads. And that's how, like, we're essentially going to scale out read replicas to as many regions as you want. And then also we'll look at trying to get as close to the edge as possible. Maybe some stuff with, of course, offline will be a big one for us. Very hard to solve with Postgres, but you should be able to download a lot of the data to the client or to the browser and then interact that way. So you read and maybe you pop something onto a queue and you push it up later. So it's kind of optimistic updates. And then maybe some investigation around SQLite's becoming very popular and also very robust with globally distributed stuff. So it's got a problem with multi-user work, but because we have row-level security, you could, in theory, maybe dump an entire Postgres database for an individual user into a SQLite database. That's another thing we'll explore. But yeah, long story short, we haven't solved all of the problems. We'll definitely need to solve these kind of harder problems now. Yep.
If I was self-hosting this and using Supabase, what does the backend look like? I feel like there's a bunch of setup in the backend, declaring your schemas and all of that.
Yep, it's a good question. The question was, if I was self-hosting, what does the backend look like? You can really use the middleware with, so the key is the database, Postgres, and you can use it with any Postgres provider. You could use it with RDS, you could use it with your own self-hosted Postgres. You won't get a bunch of the extensions. For example, GraphQL will try to push into AWS and a few of these other ones. But otherwise, here is, for example, I don't know if everyone's familiar with Docker Compose, but you can run Docker Compose up on this file and it'll start everything. It's really a few different tools, the dashboard, a reverse proxy, the auth server, which is the Netlify one, the API server, which is a very popular open source tool called Postgres. We employ the lead maintainer of that. The real-time server, the Elixir one that we said, the storage server. So it's, yeah, and then some meta stuff for interacting with the database.
So what I'd be doing is I'd go Docker Compose up and I would get like that dashboard application end off. And I'll just log in and create containers.
Yep. So you'd run. The question was, how would I do it? You just run Docker Compose up. You see the dashboard. Some of the stuff would be missing. So, for example, you can't reconfigure on locally. You configure here on the Docker Compose file instead of in the dashboard itself, because we can't hook into the Docker. The other thing is we've got a CLI, so you can do Supabase init, Supabase start, and you'll also see all of that, and then you can push it into production when you're ready. Yeah. Yep.
So this is a bit of a back to basics question. I'm trying to understand what Supabase is and isn't.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a real-time database based on Postgres. it is an ORM in JavaScript that accesses it, and it is a hosted service. Is that the three things the Supabase are? Am I missing anything?
No, that's the question was, what is it? It's a database with real time, an ORM, I think you said, and a hosted service. Yep, that hits the nail on the head pretty much. I wouldn't say an ORM of sorts because you don't need to.
Apologize.
Yeah, but we provide a nice library that makes it feel like an ORM experience, I'd say. Yeah.
I just saw from a Docker Compose, so the file storage just backs into Postgres as well.
Yeah, okay, this is the very cool thing. So actually the file storage backs onto S3 or local file. But what we do is we we map the S3. If you've ever used S3, it's basically a KV store, so you can see the list. So it's like / bucket name / whatever. We map all of that into Postgres, and then you write your access rules as row-level security rules. So you can say you, a user, can only access these files, or maybe authenticated users can access this bucket, and that means that it's very hard to do auth on S3 actually. So we've just made it incredibly easy, and yeah, that's the goal.
So it would be effectively a long tokenized URL that you would store in the database, and that's kind of how the ACL works.
Yep. So the just to show the rules on writing, I think we've got Supabase. I think here on our storage, here's what a rule for restricting access to a certain bucket, for example. So I'd say public access to all objects inside the avatars bucket. So the bucket ID is avatars. I would set that up. If we ask when you set up a bucket what you're going to call it, and you'll call it avatars. So here is public. If I only want authenticated users, so they're logged in with Supabase, to access it, I say for all objects, if they're where auth.role equals authenticated. So we do a bit of like stuff when you log in to populate the JWT. We pass the JWT to Postgres, and then you can use all the information inside the JWT to allow or disallow access. And that's really what auth.role is doing. It's just checking the JWT to make sure that the role is authenticated.
So if you're self-hosting it, does it still use S3, or does it use some like a mini S3 or whatever it's called?
You could, it's only S3 at this stage, but the plan is that we'll add as many storage providers as possible. And of course, S3 has many S3 compatible services. So hopefully eventually Backblaze or R2 or any storage system. Any others? Yep.
When it comes to the functions, so say you've got a use case where, and I may have missed this when you were talking about the functions, you need to do some logic server side and you need to contact another API from a third service provider and you have a one API key subscription to it. Is that are those functions, where are you writing those? Are you able to write the JavaScript server side too, or is it you go in Portal and you write some functions in there?
The functions that I showed you, the database function, or in general, how would you solve this problem? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, so just more in general, and then also where do you write the functions that live inside the database?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so the question is kind of where do you write your functions and how do you deal with code that you want not in the browser? Because actually that's the key. It's very fast because there's no middle tier. It basically goes from browser to database. That makes 100 millisecond response times possible even for large blocks of code. So if you've got some secrets, first of all, you can use Deno functions, which is a great idea. You can provide, if you're using Next.js, it's very easy to use with Supabase. So if you're using a framework which already brings functions, you can deploy it there. If you want to use the database functions, it's a bit harder to store secrets in there, but actually a hint for the future, we'll be storing or providing a sort of layer around a vault where you can actually store secrets inside the database. You can encrypt and decrypt columns and do a bunch of nice stuff there. So we provide basically a lot of options for that now.
what it is, what that library is. So how is it more, or how is it less than an ORM? Less is the thing that's convenient.
Yeah, well, I guess you could call her an ORM. I'm going to just come back to this one, which is the, if I zoom in, the auto-generated API. So here for the movies table, if I go to here, you can see actually that it is just a URL that I'm supplying here. And I don't know if you can see this, but I'm requesting /movies and the select equals ID. I'm going to select the table. So all we're actually doing with that library is very small. It basically remaps some code into a new URL, and then it just calls a REST service. The reason why I'd say maybe not an ORM is because you don't need to sort of create models. You don't generate your schema from the JavaScript library itself. You can create tables, you can create database migrations, you can bring an existing Postgres database to Supabase, and it will automatically work. You don't need to set up anything again. It's just going to work.
So the logic isn't in the JavaScript library. The logic is in the Postgres component that turns a Postgres database into a RESTful API or an HTTP API.
Yep, and actually that's one of the things that makes it very fast. The logic for all of this is going to remap into a Postgres query, and the real logic runs on the database. So it's just, once again, leveraging Postgres as much as we can. Cool.
Just while you're on it, 'cause you're showing the template, and I noticed you had defined your movies interface, I think, separately. Have you got anything around auto-generating the types?
Yep.
Is that to come, or?
Yep. So the question was, do we auto-generate types? Very good. So this API actually provides a Swagger implementation, and you can generate the types from Swagger. If I come here, developers, documentation, reference, generating types, you can generate them from a GitHub action as well, and you provide it here. So here is the message, would be the movies table. So you can auto-generate all these types. Now, we're about to bring out Supabase JS v2, and we're actually going to do a lot of sort of generation of additional things. So you'll be able to generate not just JavaScript types or TypeScript types, maybe additional types for other languages, and maybe a bunch of other stuff will get generated out of the database itself. That's nice because we can really introspect the database once again and just stick, like it's kind of a single source of truth once again, and we'll make everything as Postgres native as possible. Yeah. And really, this is kind of a lot of people treat their data store as a bit of a dumb store. Like you'll maybe, I don't know, like most ORMs will just sort of treat Postgres as just store data, retrieve data. Whereas the way we're going is, well, what are the good things Postgres can do? Full text search, extensions, all these things. And then we'll extract those features out of Postgres rather than trying to chuck middleware features into Postgres. Yep. Maybe, I think, maybe just like one or two more questions. Yeah.
Just want to ask, how confident are you to this business model?
To the business model? Yeah.
Because in my limited experience, that company will hire backend and both backend and front-end team.
Yep.
Backend guys, like, they want their job, so probably won't.
Yep. It's good. Well, okay, so the question, how confident are we on our business model? Because people will hire back-end engineers, and back-end engineers don't want to give up their job. There's definitely, if you look at the trend, the front-end engineers is going like this, and back-end engineers goes kind of a little bit more like this. I'm quite confident on the business model of databases in particular. Mongo's 35 billion, I think, or it was probably peak bubble. But of course, like as well, like even AWS RDS, their database, I think or their whole database component of AWS is something like 10 billion revenue per year. So the space is huge. All the database, I know most of the database players, we're not too scared of each other because the market's going like this. So we just want, some slice of the pie and we want to be in the space. So we kind of get along. And I think it's just one of these ones that's hard to crack, but if you get in, then the opportunity is bigger. So yeah, if you're looking for a role, I'm quite confident we'll be able to pay you for a while. Cool. Okay, that's perfect. Thanks, team.
All right, we have one more talk for the night, which is Anthony Mataz, who's going to be setting up in a moment, and he's going to be talking to us about Remix, doing more with less. So welcome, Anthony.
So I'm here tonight to bring more international flavor to Melbourne JS. No, I'm kidding. But mostly coming here to talk about Remix. In the contrary than everyone else, I don't work for Remix, but I still like what they're doing. So I'm here to talk about what I've learned using it. Okay, and I'm super excited to be here tonight because we have talk about a way to build a better website with React, which is Remix, a data layer, and much more, Supabase, as we've seen, not just a pretty data layer, and a way to deploy this code at the edge worldwide with Dino deploy. So Remix needs all of those. So let's dive deeper. But before, so my name is Anthony Mita. You can find me on Twitter under NSFounder, GitHub @sync. So every time you create, if you want to say hi, just create an issue on GitHub with @sync, like everyone does every single day. and I'll get a nice email. Sometimes I come to you and I say hi, and I get bored. It was a terrible nickname. Okay, so what is Remix? Remix is this guy here. There's something at the center. So Remix is just picture Next.js having a baby with a Next.js middleware, deployed by Cloudflare and React Query. So that's what makes Remix. So Remix is a React frameworks that help you build better websites. That's not from me. It's from their marketing website, and it does React, but it doesn't care about what you do for your data. So, for example, Supabase is a really good match to when you want to query data, store data, etc. With Remix, and then you need somewhere to deploy you fantastic new React application, and that's what, for example, Remix support Dino deploy, so you can use Dino deploy to do Remix. It's not the best match in heaven with Dino deploy because you still have to compile your stuff. It's not very native to Dino, but it still works, etc. And take all this to Remix is kind of the center of your things, because not only does your React component, but it's in charge of the networking as well, and everything that goes around good networking practices, etc. And also for anyone that have been geeking in on all this talk that have been happening recently, and everyone's excited about React 18, and still everyone's confused about what to do with networking, with suspense and everything. And I show you a nice way with Remix to not have to worry about any of those. Because people, as of recent, is saying don't use effect for everything, especially don't use it for data fetching, etc. So Remix doesn't, you don't need to do use effects you don't need to use effect for data fetching because it's baked into the framework in a very, very nice cohesive way. So can you put your hands up if you've ever used a React Router? And is there anyone here that doesn't know what React Router is? Yeah. That's good. Thank you. It should always be one exception to the rule. But so basically, for anyone that's done some React, and again, so I'm forgetting, tonight we're not in a React meetup, even though it's the same venue. We are a JavaScript meetup. So React Router basically is what has, it's the default, one of the default, unless you're using Next.js, way to do routing in React. It's been there forever. It's been there to version 6, the 7 is going to come, etc. So so if you use, for example, create React app, and you want to do routing, most likely you're going to end up using React Router. And actually, out of React Router, there was this stuff called Rich Router. That's from the same person. So if you want Remix, it's the extension to React Router, created by the same person. Okay, doc? And actually, what's been happening is the people from React Router created Remix. People liked what they were seeing with the way you can load and mutate data, and then they decided to bring back those features into React Router. So React Router version 6.4 is in alpha now, has some of the features that Remix has. It's all about the data loading and suspense, etc. And so if you are using Next.js and you're very happy with Next.js, Remix is not necessary for you. Okay, doc? What's there after? It's every single person that has a React app that has a heavy JavaScript in there and have slow performances. And I think they have a solution to those slow performances, etc. It's the same if you are a heavy GraphQL user. For example, Remix is not necessarily the best choice for you. I'll tell you why later. Okay, doc. But so they really want to make it super, super easy for any React Router app to be migrated to Remix easily over time. It's not, the story is not there yet, but it will happen very soon. Okay, doc. And so that's on the right here, if you can see, that's just an example of the latest React Router. You can see you do route in JavaScript. And so Remix changes this. So React Router here, and now we're going to see a small demo of the origin of the name Remix. And so because they keep explaining us that what they want to do with Remix is teaching us, they're all old school JavaScript developer. I started very late in my JavaScript career. I was a mobile developer before. So for me, seeing what they're showing was all very new to me, but probably it's not new to Mark, for example. It's done this for a while, etc. But so they want to remix the old stuff. So think of a HTML form. That's the old stuff, or a PHP website, etc., where you used to have everything into one file, and apparently things were fun. I've never really quite did PHP. I remember putting the local time stuff or something a long time ago. And with the new stuff I know it's React. It's not the latest shiny new stuff, but it's still a very popular framework. So that's what they call the new. And all these good practices about doing the best of your networking layers, etc. So we're gonna have a tiny little demo. And again, I didn't create this, so I spent some time last week creating a really interesting demo, and I saw Kenzie Dodds. So Kenzie Dodds is a very pro-efficient JavaScript developer that works for Remix. Is in charge of the, I think, developer UX or something. So chief of fun at Remix. He does all the talk and interesting things. He's really famous for React testing and React testing library, etc. So he created a really interesting a demo last week, and I've just took his demo and it's just going to show you what I mean by remixing the old with the new. Okay, doc? So, and it's the typical remix demo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an app, and can someone guess what I'm going to do? It has to do with JavaScript.
Disable it.
Yeah, exactly. So everyone's doing this. That's always, and it's not necessarily the best way to show something, but I think it's still a really, really good example. And again, for people like me that haven't done too much HTML and stuff before JavaScript, and I started as a React Native developer, so I was always very JavaScript heavy. So I'm going to take this app. So I'm just going to start the app. Sorry, you don't need to see anything. Doesn't matter for now. We're just going to dev. Okay, doc. After I've got a presentation mode, it's going to be big, but we're not looking at code yet. Okay, doc. So we've got this demo app here. Okay, doc. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to refresh, and it works. So now we're going to go disable JavaScript. Okay, and that's a very basic React application. Actually, the To-Dos app is based on the sample that every framework, single framework. I think it used to be popular a few years ago where everyone would create a To-Do app and do this stuff. And show you how does your framework compare against any other framework. Okay, doc. So I'm going to disable JavaScript here. I'm going to refresh. You can see that JavaScript isn't loading here. Okay, so it's disabled. And I'm going to create the to-do. Okay, so I'm going to say Melb.js, and I'm going to say hello. And then I'm going to go close this to-do and delete this to-do. So you can see that everything is still working. And so what's happening, it's every time you do something here, 32, is all it does is that this remix frameworks is a framework that does server-side rendering only, in opposite to Next, where Next, you're never quite sure what you're going to do. Are you going to deploy a static website? Are you going to use server-side rendering? Are you not going to use server-side rendering? Are you going to do prefetching? Remix doesn't do anything but server-side rendering. Okay, no. And so all it does is that it serves you can see here, it's probably a little small, but it just, the point is like, it just serves HTML and CSS. That's the reason it works. And when you're submitting, this is just a basic form, and you're just posting to your endpoint. And we're going to see more code later on, etc. So that's what it means. But it doesn't mean that if you, it's not mean, Remix is, don't go disable your JavaScript, but it's just like, it's this concept of progressive enhancement. If you're in a bad network and you're having issues and you still want someone to use your app, it's really nice that the fact that JavaScript hasn't loaded or failed to load, etc., that your app is still working. That's a consequence that you get for free. I mean, it's not necessarily free. You still have to know how to use the current web technology to achieve this, but it's a lot more accessible, and we're going to see this in a bit. Before I forget, I'm going to go re-enable my, because then you forget, sometimes you forget that you have disabled your JavaScript and you're wondering why some things don't work. So enable JavaScript. Okay, it's back. Refresh. We're going to go back to the slides. But so you really had a really small concept of the new an HTML form, and you can still write your code in React. So when I was doing this, I learned a lot about the form and all this web API that existed. That when I was doing React, the first thing I will do is on my form, I will do cancel the event from my cancel the events, and then don't use anything that the browser provides. Okay. You also, it's something that I've noticed, and more people saying this is like with Remix, you have to worry a lot less about state management when using Remix. And for example, they do data loading for you and mutations done for you. They will, when you mutate a part of your app, they will reload the other part of your app, because they all know how the Remix app is built and the routing, so they know what to do. And then they add all this progressive announcement. You turn your form into a form with an uppercase, and suddenly when you have JavaScript, you have a bunch of new features you can do. You have a link like next.js that lets you do prefetching, etc., with preloading, etc. And sometimes they say Remix is built as a browser emulator, so it just let you use web primitive, learn about how to use web primitive, like we've seen with Dino, where you can use all these web primitives that originally come from the browser, but you can use them on the server as well when you server-side render, which is quite interesting. Okay, so Remix, in contrary to React Router, Remix use file system routing like next.js. They have some even more interesting things like pathless layout route. It's always been a pain with next.js, for example, and they use a quite similar conversion as next.js, where your index route is here. Then if you have a route with nodes, you're going to have your index, etc., and then you have your nested route. So that's where they go even further. So that's one thing that I really like about Remix is the concept of nested route, and it's so good, and it's really good sometimes to have competitions. That's the Next.js team open up a new layout RFC, a request for comments. That's discussing how they're going to do with Next.js, because Next.js doesn't use React Router, how they're going to do a similar layout system where you can do similar things that what Remix does. Because I can tell you, once you've learned how Remix does nested routing, is really contagious, and you want to do it everywhere, and you get to see. And when nested routing at the same time is baked in with how you fetch data and mutate data, it's become this mix that's quite interesting. So we're going to go through this tiny little video here. I'm going to try to post a video. Yeah. So we're going to start with this. So let's start with the stuff. So for example, based on the screen we've seen, so here is your route. This is your route. Okay, doc? But you can see in the path, if you can see, I'm sorry if it's small, I think I can go bigger here. Okay, doc, you can see you have got your routes, but then you still have sales/invoice/stuff. So you have another nested route, so we're gonna go to the next one, so that's your index route, okay? Then you go into the next one, which is your sales route. So your index routes just give you menus to the side, okay, doc? And then your sales route is an outlet that's embedded there that show all the sales. And then, so it's if you want, it's a React component that does this. Then you can see in the path you have invoice, so you have another outlets that embed this invoice together here. And then finally, you have an invoice ID here, and you can see you're gonna have another route that's you can see from here, invoice route. That's going to be the last part. And what's really, really interesting with this concept of nested route is that if you have a button here that mutates this amount, okay, doc, it's automatically, once you mutate this, it's automatically going to tell all you parent route, say, hey, I think you should refetch because we just modify something here. This amount needs to be changed here. So you don't have to worry about anything. They're just going to update all your route for you, recall you remix loading functions, and then everything's going to be sorted for you. So it lets you easily build some quite dynamic website without having to worry about what's happening, etc. Again, doing that kind, people don't really talk about this, but what I've noticed, and it's exactly the same, I'm going to talk about GraphQL in a second. It's like when you do GraphQL, what happens when you try to load all. So remember, the experience that the user will end up with is that when it loads this URL, there's not going to be any loading spinner anymore, anywhere. It's just going to load this page with all the data ready. And what happened in practice is that if, for example, when you're fetching to invoice, it takes too long to fetch this amount, the whole page is going to take forever to load because it's waiting for this to load, this to load, this to load. Even to we're going to see in next slide, it doesn't load, it can parallel, it can load those things in parallel, but still it's not optimum. So you still stop by a really, really slow fetcher, for example. If something's slow, you're still going to end up with an issues where your website's going to be wired for a long time and then show up. But I've got a demo at the end of this slide that there's a solution to this that's really quite interesting as well. And for anyone that's been using React Relay and you do this and you see this and fetching everything into one request and having fragment everywhere, fragment, etc. All this has been done with GraphQL, but that's really interesting. To Remix developer, I don't think they're a very big fan of GraphQL. So it's like they put their head into sand and just ignore that GraphQL exists. And just do their own, and they fix all very similar problem. But and I'm a massive GraphQL fan here. But what I find very interesting with Remix is that they made all this technology that is for a newcomer. It's very, very hard to grasp. Relay, GraphQL, fetching, defer, fetching, etc. But they make all this concept in Remix very, very nice and easy. And The secret is the developer of Remix and React Router. They used to run this company called, before COVID, called React Training, and they've taught thousands of developers how to do React, how to do fetching, how to do everything, so they can feel the pain. And so they really came up with a framework that's really quite interesting and really help, especially newcomer, to grasp how do you do server-side rendering, how do you fetch data, how do you not worry about too much, etc. But they have no opinion about data, how you get your data. You can use Supabase, you can use anything you want. And where you deploy, it doesn't matter. You can use Fly, you can use anything. Okay, and so when I said worry about, so what does this say? I forgot to, obsess over the network tasks. There's always this demo and stuff, and they always show you. So on the left, imagine it's a React app, your typical React app that use effect and fetch. So it gets the route, and then it gets more GSX coming down, and user effect is like, no, I know that I need the sales component. I'm gonna go fetch the sales component. And the sales component had a call to stuff. So it cannot all load in parallel because it has to load this component, then this component, and then this component. So it ends up taking quite some time, but the good thing is you'll be very, very quickly presented with a spinner. So the page not going to be white for a long time, but you're going to present it with a spinner. So a spinner is going to show, etc. If you go to the remix.run website, you can scroll through and you can see a really example of spinner versus remix. No spinner, but slightly, as you can see from the beginning, because you load your document from the server side, and if you have many queries, it might take some time because it's waiting for all those queries to finish before it gives you a document that has no loading state, okay? Again, there's a solution to this at the end of this talk. So I'm going to cancel this. But so you can see it's quite interesting. You load everything, you always have your data. So when you're using your React component, you never have to worry. I'm not sure if anyone's ever used anything like Apollo, anything you have is loading as data, as error, etc. So you never end up in this state. Even for error, there's a different way to catch those errors. So when you're in your component called invoice and you're about to render to invoice data, the data is going to be there. If it's not there, it's going to go into an error component somewhere else, similar to suspense for anyone that's familiar with suspense and error boundaries, or if there's no loading state, basically. But there could be, so I'll show you what could be. So again, so it's Remix is React Router plus a compiler. Okay, so the compiler is that they're reusing ESBuild. These days, everyone's using ESBuild. ESBuild is, if you want Webpack, not really Webpack, but something that lets you bundle your JavaScript in a really, really fast way because they're not using JavaScript. But there are some bundlers that are new as well, that are using JavaScript as well, and it's still very fast. But it seems that these days everyone likes to rewrite something with ESBuild in Go or with SWC with Next.js in Rust, etc. It's the trend, so you have to build something. And ESBuild was made very prominent by Vite. Sorry, I'm French, I should know, Vite. And I corrected the last presenter last few weeks ago. So it's Vite. It's yet another framework that lets you do build React app, etc. And so because it has a compiler, it has React Router, so they know everything about your route, they know everything about your code. They can do some really interesting things. So the code splitting by route, so every time there's a route / invoice, etc., the code is split, so it's just going to load the JavaScript it needs to display that route and its children, for example. It's only going to load the data that it needs to display that route. Not if nothing is shown, you don't have to load that data that is not necessary. And it's the same. Something that is very, very unique to Remix as well is like if you import an index.js index.css file, a CSS file somewhere, it's just going to load this CSS file for that exact route. So you can be very minimal and just load the CSS you need. And what you can do as a side effect is that if you have a children that loads another CSS, it could override to other CSS and change things, etc. It's very fast. But because they know everything about your app and they have a compiler and they've done all these things, it works really, really well. And ESBuild is super fast. Remix is super fast. And they have some small convention. One that you have to be aware of is that if you have some node-only code, so you notice that when you do server-side rendering, you always have these issues like, am I using a node library? Or can this library build run into a browser? So if you have something that doesn't run in a browser, or you don't want to ever be run on a browser, you just name your file, for example, user.server.ts. And for example, if you want to fetch user from Supabase, you put this user there into server, and you don't have to ever provide credential to your front end to fetch user data, for example. It's always going to stay on the server. Very similar to API routes in Next.js. Okay, so now, and why is this good? So again, I've said this 100 times, but data loading is done for us. Data mutation is done for us as well. It's like when you change something, adding a to-do, for example, they will cancel requests for you. I'll show you a demo after this. So, you know, the code that we've seen from the Supabase demo that had an abort controller and a really long code when you're using React Fetch, etc., you don't have to do any of this stuff because they've done this for you. Again, it's backend agnostic. Use Supabase, use anything you want. It's often used with Prisma as well, and there's a really nice example with Prisma and SQLite because it's trending these days. Again, because you control the backend and you fetcher, you can really reduce to only what you need. So for example, when you're fetching a user and you can see new component, you're only displaying, for example, if that's a really bad example, but after we're gonna have a better example there that was just taken from the Remix website is like, when you fetch the list of projects, you can see that here, you're only fetching project, you're only showing project.title, etc. So what you should do here, you should just make sure when you fetch your project, you should say, select only your title, because you don't need anything else. It's kind of a very cheap GraphQL, because you can only return what you need, and because everything is collocated into one file, as you can see, everything is into one file, so you have your loader, that's where you load the data. So this component needs to show project, so it's going to fetch project, and has a form here. I can look at my screen as well. He has a form that will mutate the data, so change, add new projects, etc. So he has an action here. So what's really interesting, so everything is collocated into one spot. It's very nice. So when you go look at this, it's really nice, especially if you're starting or you have a smaller project and you don't have a API team, etc. You can do this quite easily. As well, if you want to use your own API and use this as a backend for frontend, etc., you can as well. If you don't want to use loader, you don't have to. You can still use SVC or React Query, etc. You can do any of this stuff. But once you do this, as you can see, once I get into my project here, and I use the loader data, so it means go fetch the project. And when it goes fetch the project, it does this on the server side. So it does this on the server. The project are not fetched on the client. And it's going to call to server endpoints to give me the data. By the time you're here, you can see you have projects. So by the time you're here, you know you have project. You don't have to check, are my project loading or not? Is there an error, etc. You always end up with something that has your data. Okay, doc? And then there's the other concept of use transition, which is when you mutate data, you want to know what's happening. So for example, when you submit something, you create a new post, you want to see, am I loading? Is it submitting the form right now or not, etc. So you can change your button, you can disable your button, etc. So that's basically the two hooks you need to know about. Use loader data, use transition. There's another one as well to directly use your data from your actions, but it's not that important. There's so much, etc. I'm gonna go and stuff. And again, what I find really interesting is that I've said this many times, but everything is collocated into one file. So it's quite refreshing to see everything at once. I know you're gonna end up, if you have something more complicated, you're gonna move some of your fetching code into a different file. But when you look at this, you can see everything's really, really well. And so what you can do as well is that you can type everything into this file, and you can I'll show you a demo now. Yeah, we're gonna go back to the to-do MVC, and I've got a trick. I've just installed this presentation mode here. So hopefully this should be big enough. Yeah, is this big enough? I don't know how to make it bigger. So what you can see with your code here is, let's go to my, again, this is not my code, but when you look at your to-do stuff, so you use to load the data, and when you look at the to-dos as well, you can see the old type, etc. And there's no magic to this. It's just because it's the same file, and you declare what you're gonna load on your loader, that's your loader, and you say, I'm gonna return some JSON stuff, and I'm fetching data from the stuff. So because it's all into one file, it's really easy to type everything. Same with the form, and etc. Because it's all in one file, and it's convenient. It doesn't mean you cannot type anything if it's not in one file, but you can see like everything, it's not necessarily the most not verbose code here, because it has a lot, and I'm gonna show you why. But you can still see that, oh, I'm fetching this to-dos there, okay, and so then everything is typed, and you can see again, no loading states, nothing. It's just your to-do are here, they're ready to go. Okay, doc. I'm gonna switch back to the where am I? Okay, doc. Here, again, and I'm glad we had some mention about web primitives and stuff with Dino, etc. So it's built on the same. So I think Remix was inspired. They say Cloudflare, but I'm not sure if Cloudflare worker came before Dino deploy or Dino itself. So yeah, so it was inspired by Cloudflare, which were one of the first to have. I think Netlify was very early on as well to have this request response. So use web primitives that are accessible to browser, and we have typing for all of those, like a request, a response. So if we go back to the previous slide here, you can see when you have a request here, this is just a request, and it's just a normal request from the web platform. So when you learn how to use request, I've learned that a request has form data. So that's built into any browser, etc. And when it's not available in Node, because Dino does such a better job than Node, where they have all those web requests, web API ready for you to consume, if they make sense. And so in Remix, they will probably fill this for Node, so you still have access to request, response, and all this web platform API, streaming, etc. There. They don't have much stuff about WebSocket at the moment, but they have some really sweet stuff coming up with server send, event, etc. And again, I can see, so once you learn about request, that's really great, because you can use request in your web browser anywhere. In Dino, you can use, I'm sure Dino has web requests as well, and in Cloudflare or Netlify function, etc. Anywhere you have those things. And as well, you can see here is that there is the concept of, it's very easy to redirect you from an action. You say, once you're done and I'm successful, just direct me to where I need to be. So it's very convenient. Again, there's so much talk about stuff. And again, I did say this before, but it's because they use those web platform primitive, it's very easy to pick the platform you want. So for example, you can use Dino deploy, you can deploy this on Cloudflare, any version of Node on Docker. Fly.io is a very good example of Docker deployment for, you can deploy this on Vercel or Netlify if you want to. And again, you can choose your own data layer, okay? But just be careful when you use some platform like Dino deploy or Netlify and stuff, and you deploy this across region, don't forget about your data, okay? Like your data isn't distributed as much as your function. So there's no point having a really fast function that render your JavaScript server side if it takes forever to get the data, because your function is based in Switzerland and your data is in Peru, somewhere in Peru. Like, it makes no sense. So you have you have to think about when you distribute this on those platforms, just think about your data. And for example, if you go see one of the biggest Remix run app that's open source is actually Kenzie Dodd's website. He has a very complicated website. When you think about a personal website, this is not what Kenzie Dodd's website is. He has thousands of users. He has a course platform in Inter, etc. And he has some, it's very interesting when you're curious about Remix, is that he has some very interesting pattern about what to do. Not everything is really good, but for example, at this file here, it shows you how to use, for example, Prisma on Fly, and having a write replica that is very close to a read replica that distributed everywhere for your database. And a write replicate, that's when you have to write, it's just going to go through this one place. So it might be slower to write, but much faster to read, etc. So it has some really nice example as well. And there's some things to remember as well when you do Remix. There's these things that bite me once as well, is that Remix does hot reloading. They don't do HMR, hot module replacement. So if you have a form and you make a change, you're going to lose the state, but it's still going to reload the page. Not that they don't want to do it, they just haven't done it yet. But you have to remember, if you have a connections to a database, etc., to store this somewhere, because every time Remix refresh, it might do a new network connection, etc. So you can store your connection into a global state somewhere, etc. There's an example of this everywhere. Yes, okay, so I'm going to go back to this one. And I've said this, I keep saying the same thing, sorry. So Remix is server-side rendering only. At first I was thinking it's the only things that they wanted to do. And in a chat recently on changelog, one of the co-founder of Remix did say, it's just what we're doing at the moment. There might be a different story very soon. So at the moment you can only do server-side rendering only. And again, server-side rendering is very good. It's not good for every situations, but if you have an e-commerce website where every single second or milliseconds matter to you, server-side rendering, and as well, you always end up with a really nice user experience if you don't have loading screen, as long as you can get your data loaded really quickly. And there's no support for React Server Component. I think the Remix team is quite against React Server Component, and Suspense is a little bit into air, but there's a demo with Suspense actually that I'm going to come up. And that's one of the trade-off that I'm really fine with. For example, for me, every time I do Next.js, I like to use Next.js with Relay. And the first thing I do is like, how do I get my Next.js app server-side rendered with Relay? And it's always a pain because you have to roll your own solution to this. You have to say, how do I fetch query? Where do I get the data from? Where do I inject? Do I get my JSON back properly, etc. Versus Remix is server-side only, and it has done everything for you, so it's very accessible. Okay, I'm going to go to the next one. And again, just as a trend, it seems that it's now a lot much cheaper to run your own server or to deploy to a serverless function somewhere. And I can see that the trend is trending back towards server-side rendering. It has some really nice thing when you can server-side render, etc. And now you can have server-side rendering, distributed data with all the cool stuff. I mean, PlanetScale has a solution for distributed data. I'm sure we're going to have solutions here as well for many more platforms that will think about distributing this everywhere. And I think server-side rendering is, if you can do it and you can pull this properly, you're going to end up with a better experience for you developer. So you're not showing any spinners or fading, loading, or anything. So sometimes it'll be tiring. Like you get so excited, you get your website, then it's loading. I mean, it's better this than not loading or not having a website. But it's gone a little bit cheaper, and to so many platforms like Fly.io, it's free to deploy anything. You can even have a database for free as long as it's under 1 gigabyte. Supabase has a very good free offering as well, etc. So it's good. And now I'm going to show you the last demo. So the last thing that Remix does, it helps you ship better React apps. So let's talk about pending state, optimistic UI, automatic rollback on failure, and then we're going to talk about error boundary and the catch boundary. But because you don't spend much time thinking about how do I load my data, how do I mutate my data, etc. The Remix team always say, no, you can focus on the things that matter to your user, a very, very good user experience. And again, all this pending state, optimistic UI, rollback on failure, etc. I all became familiar of this when I was using GraphQL with a really good network client like Relay or React framework for Relay, for React called Relay, and you have all this stuff. So nothing of this is new. Like pending state, optimistic UI, or rollback is not new, but it's very, very easy to do. And then they have some very, very interesting things. We're going to come back to it about error boundary and catch boundary. But we're going to go with so we're going to go back to the same demo again. Keep reusing the same things. So here. So now I've got JavaScript enabled, okay? I'm gonna show you, so first, I'm gonna disable JavaScript again, and I'm gonna show you the experience you have. Let's say you have a really slow network, okay? So I'm gonna, shouldn't swear, sorry. I've got a really slow network here, so I'm gonna create a new to-do, and you're gonna see it's gonna take a while for my to-do to start. But you know something's loading because the browser by default, it will put a spinner there. So you don't have to worry about putting a spinner if you don't have JavaScript. You're gonna have something show here, and you know something's loading. But you can see it takes quite some times, okay? And same when you delete something, it takes quite some time. What if I could tell you that you could still be on a slow network, and if you enable JavaScript, you can do all this optimistic UI, so you can make it appear that things have loaded and the action has executed, and so the user will feel like everything's fast, even to their network connection is really slow. So that's what Remix does for you. So it's like lets you focus about those optimistic UI and inserting things when they're still loading, etc. So now I'm gonna enable the JavaScript here. Okay, I'm just gonna not throttling just to reload. It's not that it's very big, sorry. Here, I'm gonna go back to a very slow 3G, and now we're gonna create a new to-do, and you're gonna see it's gonna be instant. But look at the network tab at the bottom. You will see that the network request is still loading. So now I've got JavaScript enabled, so again, so I'm not using HTML form and stuff, still using HTML form, but it's the form with the uppercase. So Remix does all the heavy lifting for me now. So now I do this, and I've got some code that say, hey, just make it appear. Can you see it's still loading, pending, and then it loaded. So if I do another one, you can see even it has inserted this right away. Here, you can see it's still loading, etc. It's the same when you have a really, really slow network. Look at the network tab here, and I'm gonna do the same things many, many times, okay? And you do this. And you can you see all this red? So every time they realize that you're redoing the same things, they will cancel the previous request for you. You don't have to worry about an abort controller or anything. It's just gonna cancel the request for you. It's gonna take care of this. Because most likely what you're gonna end up with if you use a normal React framework is that your button's gonna keep toggling on, off, on, off, on, off. And this instead, it does everything and cancels the request for you, and you're gonna always end up in the state you want it to be, okay? And the final tricks in here, so we're gonna simulate an error. So it's really hard to be offline and have a network. So let's say I'm gonna try to delete this to-do here, and my network it's gonna fail to delete this to-do. Okay, doc? So I'm just gonna create a fake error in here. Sorry, where am I? I need to go to the right one. A Remix to-do. Cancel this presentation mode here. Sorry, I'm just gonna git stash apply. I think, yeah. So if you can see, what I did is that I just make sure that it explodes. So every time I'm trying to delete a to-do, I'm deleting a to-do. Yeah, I'm just gonna explode. So that's gonna simulate an error. Okay, doc. So now I'm there. I'm gonna delete the to-dos. So if again, this requires JavaScript, so I'm gonna delete this one, and you're gonna see it's gonna go away, but then it came back. Why? It's because it failed to do so. They automatically roll back this for you. And if you've done this before, unless you're using GraphQL and Relay or Apollo, etc., this is all the things you have to think about. But if you look at the code from this, I shared the code from C. It's quite easy to actually this to-do's demo is quite more tricky to do a lot of things. It's just for Ken's talk, but it's quite easy to see. You delete something, it fell, it comes back, everything's good. Like you could show an error if you want, etc. But that's what they mean by just concentrate on a good user experience. Okay, doc. So, it's 9 p.m. I'm gonna go quickly. So as well, so I'll finish very, very quickly. So they have this. I lost the top of my slide, sorry. Yeah, they have this other really stuff that's really good, and that was the first thing when Ken C. Dodds joined Remix. He created these stacks. So a stack, if you want, is an application that is ready to go. That's going to have your data fetching sorted if you want to use Prisma, if you want to use AWS, if you want to use Cloudflare, etc. There's all these different stack that have everything sorted for you. You just create them very easily with create remix, template remix, and you choose the stack you want, and everyone is free to contribute a stack. I saw last week a stack that had Cloudflare, Rust, and Wasm, for example. It was called, I think, the Grunge stack or something. No, the Metal stack or something like this. And for example, in this stack, it's going to have Tailwind set up for you, data with Prisma, authentications done for you as well. It's all written in code. Authentication remix is quite straightforward. If you want to roll your own, there's a testing, there's a Cypress, end-to-end test, there's linting and GitHub Actions. So by the time you generate this stuff, you're going to end up with, once you deploy this, you have everything. You're going to deploy it to fly.io, for example, has auto instructions, has even nice emoji for all your GitHub Actions you're running, and everything's set up. So it's really refreshing to see this, that is all ready to go, etc. And people keep creating more and more of those stacks for you. It's really good. So now just to finish with the things that could be better. Okay, so Remix does hot reloading, but doesn't support HMR. Remember, if you have a form, it's not gonna remember the state. Next.js does a really good job at hot module replacement. It's not they don't want to do it. Like I said, they're working on it. It's gonna come later. Monorepo support could be better. If you want a solution, I've created a small fix for this. So if you have a monorepo, basically it's here. So if you have a monorepo in here, and you have your UI library, when you save changes in your UI library, it doesn't hot reload for you. So you can create a small patch to Remix that is here, where you just tell him, just reload this every time you do HMR, and then it works, etc. So there are a few things, they're still working on it. Some issue with ESM, so there's a helper for ESM, so ESM has been a pain for everyone in the Node ecosystem, even though it's really good, using web standard, web APIs is really good. Testing story could be improved, but can see Dodds, again, famous for React testing libraries on it. There's no really nice way to stub context from Remix, etc. So it's still a little bit in the air. That's the reason they really recommend you to do end-to-end testing for your end-to-end page, and do React testing for your component on the component level, unless you're using a use function from Remix. So it's still there. You can still test your loader and just stub web request and etc. And sometimes it's really hard because it's still very new. It's been open sourced like 6 or 7 months ago, or less than a year ago. So it's still really hard to find resources when faced with issues, but there's a really, really nice Discord server that is here. It's free to join, and on the general forum, everyone's always very happy to give you an answer to what you need. But again, if you Google for your solutions with Remix, you won't have as many answers you get from Next.js, etc. So it's something to be aware. And just to finish is like, I did talk about to what's coming up next for Remix. So the end goal for them is not just to be a React framework. Okay, so they have a Vue solutions coming up. They're thinking about Svelte is Angular a community project that's put Remix with Angular. So Angular is still live and kicking in. And they have a really, really interesting and good story about suspended streaming. And it's coming very soon. So no React server component support. For people that don't know what it is, don't worry about it. People are going to talk about this later. But they have a very good story about how to avoid the pitfall of you load everything and one of your loader is really slow, so you can defer the loading to later on. And I've just seen a demo of a server-side events as well. Imagine a chat app that loads chat messages one by one on the different browser. Because they're using web platforms and web standards, they have this baked in when you return a response, etc. And we're just going to finish with just talk about this. So remember, when you fetch everything, if you have a fast loader here, slow loader here, your page is going to be slow to load because it's going to wait for this one to to load. And so GraphQL, again, because I love GraphQL, to solve this problem with these things called defer, where you say, load my loader and load this later on when it's ready. So you avoid the pitfall of waiting for a white page for a long time. And so they've created a really, really nice demo. So someone from the team at Remix, again, not my sample, created another sample to show you what's coming up with Remix. So when you install npm install or yarn install Remix, you do remix at deferred, and you're going to have this new things. And what you're going to end up with is something like this. So just a demo here. I swear we're finishing in 1.5 minutes. So we're going to go to this deferred demo. So again, this is accessible on the internet. And before we go into presentation mode, yes, here. It's hard when you go presentation mode. I lost what I wanted to do. Yeah, here. So one thing, presentation mode. Okay, so I'm just going to undo presentation mode here. I'm going to go back to this one. Don't forget to delete this one. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to start this new sample here. npm run dev. And we're going to load the app here. I'm still on a slow 3G. Okay, you can see here, we have an app. It's load server-side rendering. Again, you can see by the time it loads, except for the images loading, they cannot wait for the image to load. Actually, I remember someone had a really nice solution for freeloading images on the fly. So you can see it's loading there. So what's going to happen is like once if we delete here, once you load your read article, what it's going to do is that it's going to click on this page. And it's going to, because we're on a slow 3G, again, it's going to wait till the page is loaded and then show you the page. Okay, so I'm going to click there. It's going to wait a little bit, and then it's going to load your page. Okay, so it feels a little bit slow. So there are two things you can do. So the first thing you can do is that if we go back and we're going to refresh everything, okay, just going to go stuff. So what you can do is that it's very similar to what next.js. You can just say, hey, when you're on this link, okay, just prefetch as an intent. Sorry, enough coding. Presentation mode. Okay, so you just set on your link, you say prefetch intent. Okay, you save this, you go back to your stuff, and what's going to happen here now is I'm going to close this. So you're going to see once I go over the link, it's going to preload to next page, etc. So I go here. Oh. Dun, dun, dun. Am I still running this? Hold on, sorry. Refresh intent, read article, and there. I just got reload here. So I'm going to go there. I'm going to delete this. You can see it's loading to next article. So another post, blah, blah, for the next page. It's loading the content that it needs for the next page. And now once I click on it, it's going to be instant. So I go there, it's instant. Even though I'm still on a slow network, it has already preloaded the stuff that he wants. And now the last thing I'd like to show you is that if you really have a loader that's really slow, so we're going to do git stash. Is it git slash? Yeah. You can still use, so they've created this stuff, so look at the post, you can still use something that's going to show you loading content. We don't necessarily need to be on a slow network. Just let me double check await, if I've got await here or not. No, just this to do here, await. Yeah.
The blog one, right?
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to go to the blog one. Okay. So I'm going to go to do's. Oh, I'm on the wrong. So hard. I'm on the wrong one. Stupid. Okay, so I think I stashed the wrong one. Sorry, 1 second here. And git stash. Yeah, that's good. So now when we're gonna go here, if we load this one, you can see it's loading. You back to having your loading state there. You can see it's loading something. It has a placeholder, etc. So this is using React 18, streaming, and suspense, etc. So they have a really nice solution. I'll just show you the code of what they do. Is that what you do is that when you return something. So if we go to my blog ID here, so you use this new defer stuff. Oh, I'm gonna go in presentation mode. Okay. You use this, and again, this is a feature preview. It's coming very, very soon. It's there, it's available. It's just they're still working on the detail. So if you return, if this article here, you can see it's a promise. So if you in your defer, if you return a promise, it's gonna load the page and then load the content later on. If you change this to a wait, finally it's gonna wait. It does a server-side rendering. It's gonna wait till you do this and this here. It's gonna wait till it loads everything and not. So for anything that is defer, if you return a promise, it's gonna wait for it, load the page, render the page with empty content. And what it does, it's very, very similar to React and Suspense. It's gonna have article fallback. So it's gonna show an empty article while it's loading, for example. And then has the main article, that's the data. So you call this use defer, very similar to use loaded data, etc. Where you're gonna have your article. So article is gonna be loaded there. And you wrap this into this defer stuff. You use your loaded data from the article. It knows it's a promise, so it's gonna throw this promise, does all the things that React Suspend does, and you still end up with, if you have one part of your UI that's really slow to fetch, you can still use the best of both worlds. So you can server-side render anything. So in your defer here, if you have something else that you return and you say, this is test, etc., and this is not a promise, this is going to be server-side rendered. So it's going to have the data for this, and the other one is going to load. So that's quite interesting. So they solved this problem in a really, really nice and interesting way. And yeah, so that's it for the demo. Just gonna go back to this and wrap up and defer demo. And just wanna show you one thing again. Just talk about the error boundaries. So they have a concept very similar to React and React stuff with React Suspense, error boundary, but they have this other stuff. For example, have you ever had these things in your component? You try to fetch data, and suddenly you get no data coming back. So you're checking like, hey, if data is not equal to null, if data is null, return empty or return loading or something, etc. Or if you're trying to fetch a to-do that doesn't exist, etc. So they have this concept of, if you, in your loader, if you have something that doesn't exist, you just create a new response, again, from the web platform. Response, you give it a static 404, and you catch boundary, you just get this, you know what's the status, and then you put your placeholder. So again, it makes sure that you only get what you ask, and it's always going to be loaded data. So you're not going to have a data that is null, a to-do that is null, etc. So now to finish, to wrap up, there are some really, really, really nice resources. I'm not sure if they're very free, but Can See Dodds just released an Egghead course up and running with Remix. It's really good. There's another video course that just dropped on Egghead that's called Learn Remix by Building a Social Media Platform. Both of those are using Prisma, I think. And there's a really, really good level up tutorial by one of the Supabase developer from Melbourne about create a Supabase project with Remix, etc. It's a really good one. And if you can bear with Mongo, there's just a really recent full-on plus from Prisma that got released because Prisma added Mongo support, etc. That you can learn about Remix, etc. So there's some more libraries, not that important. I work at Spaceship, this company that does super and tech investing. We're hiring, so come talk to me if you're interested. And thank you. We're going to skip the questions because we're running out of time. Thank you. Come talk to me after.
All right. That was a long one, but thank you. A long night, so thank you all for sticking around. First of all, while this tries to connect, there we go. Big thank you to all of our speakers who made this night possible. So thank you to all of our speakers. And obviously, thank you to all of you as well. Now, there we go. Oh, I've lost it again. So this event was hosted, as you know, by Kogan. So big thank you to Kogan for the venue and the food and the drinks. So thank you, Kogan. And there is, as I mentioned earlier, a bar tab after the event if you'd like to stay even later. That is courtesy of Seek. So thank you to Seek. So if you can stay up, I'd love for you to join us for some drinks. We're going to head to the Golden Fleece Hotel, which is around the corner, and we're going to be upstairs there. So please do come along, talk about the talks that you've seen tonight, or maybe talk to me about a talk that you might want to give next month. But otherwise, that's it for tonight. Thank you so much for coming.